fatted frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun don't give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. This is Joe DeMare, and I am bringing you a mostly re-recorded episode of For a Green Future because my co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes.
during the live recording of this show, which was 10 a.m. Sunday morning on 100.7 FM in Toledo, left her microphone on and her headphones off, which created a terrible echo. And so a lot of the show was basically unlistenable. So what I'm going to do here is re-record our wonderful hour of ecology and environmental information. I'm going to record over the parts that were unlistenable. And so it'll be cutting in and out between what was a live show and this recording throughout the whole hour. And it's a great hour, as you'll hear.
Clear up a lot of these problems. There we go. And this touches on something I wanted to mention. I like to watch the Late Show. You know, I like to watch Stephen Colbert there in the mornings, and I'm comparing our performance to his. And I think the biggest difference, Rebecca, is that we don't have teleprompters.
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah.
Yeah. No rehearsal. We are live here in we're at home today, but we're live and ready to take your calls in studio, and that does lead to some degree of chaos that performers like Stephen Colbert get to avoid. Of course, we love chaos. I guess we court chaos, which is one reason that we'd like to get calls from our listening audience. And you can call anytime in the next hour at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. And you could also text. You could text your comments to 419-973-5841, and we'll put them on the air and get the little extra bit of chaos that just makes makes a show extra special. So we got a great show lined up for you today. We have a guest, his recorded interview with Gustavo Andrate, who is the new executive director of CHEJ. And we'll be talking to him shortly about the $1 billion that Biden set aside for cleaning up Superfund sites, which is kind of nice, kind of a good thing to talk about. Then we'll hear from our wonderful advertisers and patrons. Rebecca is going to be talking about, what are you going to be talking about, Rebecca?
The Trinity River in Dallas.
In Dallas, all right. And then on to environmental or ecological news.
It's a few other places besides Dallas, but Dallas-Fort Worth area is a big part of it.
Right. Okay, well, that's good, yeah. Yeah, most rivers extend beyond the city that they're in. I mean, you kind of have to have like a circular river.
Except for the Kern, which is, as we remember, a tiny short river and very twisty and dangerous, though.
Right. Of course, the Kern. How could I forget the Kern? Okay. Well, so now, what we're going to do is we're just going to chat for another, not long, 7 minutes or so about
various things that I noticed during the week that I wanted to mention, and then off to our interview with Gustavo. One thing I wanted to say is that it's cold right now, right here. So it's easy to forget that we have global warming on days like these, when the temperature's down in the teens. But it is real, as one of our stories in the second half is going to really push that home. But part of the reason that it's so cold here is actually an effect of global warming. And that we can't forget that what happens is the jet stream gets weakened, and instead of acting like a nice little corral that keeps all the Arctic air up in the Arctic where it belongs, it actually droops down further south. And
So we get to enjoy some Arctic air, which is what's going on right now.
I heard it described once as it's like somebody left the refrigerator door open. Cold places get warm, the warm places get cold, and it's just chaos, basically.
Right, and overall everything gets warmer because the refrigerator is going to churn out tons of heat, trying to keep the whole place, keep its innards cool, and the whole place will warm up. So, yeah, it's kind of like that. That's a good analogy. Something else I noticed this week, I went shopping. I went to the store yesterday, had a couple little experiences. One, I noticed that paper towels are up to $16 because there's a paper towel shortage right now amongst all the other shortages that we've got. And I just wanted to remind everybody about the existence of something called rags. And I'm a great believer in rags, and I have a whole cupboard full of them. And they're cheap, they're reusable. You just wash them when and if they get too dirty, you just throw them out. They're everything paper towels are supposed to be.
Plus, and you don't have to cut down rainforests to make them. As you know, we follow
the battles over in places like Fairy Creek, where they're cutting down the last of the old growth forest up there in Canada, but we forget that a lot of that forest, some of it gets cut up to make shingles and things, but the sawdust, which is almost half the product of cutting up a tree, is sawdust. That goes into things like paper towels and toilet paper, and it's just a horrible waste when we've got rags. Everybody's got rags. Almost everybody's got rags.
That does sort of assume, though, that you have either a washing machine in your house or transportation so you can get to the laundromat to wash things.
True. That makes it easier, but the rags are a little unique in that you can practically wash them out if you have a sink. Just with some dishwashing liquid and water, you can just sort of wash them out by hand and hang them to dry, even if you can't get to a washing machine. But one thing I discovered about rags, remembered about rags, is that you can, if you're cleaning something, like you're cleaning a countertop, for example, with a rag, you can actually polish that surface in a way that you can't do with a paper towel, because paper towels just fall apart if you try to sort of really polish something. But I've been cleaning my counters with rags, and they're actually gleaming. I have photographic proof that you can see the reflection of my toaster and stuff in my countertops now, because I've been polishing them with rags. So once again, a green future is actually superior to what we've got now. You get things cleaner and brighter, and all those adjectives advertising agencies like to associate with cleaning products. If you clean with rags, you'll get even more of that stuff. Let's see. Another little thing I wanted to mention was I went walking with a friend of mine on my, as regular listeners know, my favorite trail, the Slippery Elm Trail here in Bowling Green. And I looked down the street as we were walking to the trail, and saw there was a tree with about 250, maybe 300 crows in it. And I pointed it out to my friend, and he was like, "Oh no, that's a bad omen." And no, crows aren't bad omens. Crows are cool. And in fact, as we were getting on the trail, that whole flock of crows, I guess it's called a mob. Is that right, Rebecca? It's a mob of crows.
It's called a murder of crows. Crows have some bad publicity going on.
Yeah, it's a murder of crows. And crows mob hawks and owls and other things like that. But the whole murder of crows picked up and flew, came down right over us. Some of them were 10 feet above us. I could hear, their wings in the air, flapping in the air. And I thought it was really cool, but my friend was kind of freaked out. And it's just, one thing you have to, when you start going out in nature, you have to learn not to get freaked out. You can't really enjoy it if you get freaked out by it. I remember we had my son who was hard of hearing went to a deaf high school, and we took one of his deaf friends out to some land we have, which is pretty heavily wooded, pretty wild. And we were walking through the woods, and he was terrified. And I was like, why are you so scared? What's the matter? And he said, in sign language, this whole conversation was in sign language. He said, I'm afraid a murderer is going to jump out from behind these trees and kill us. Because, his growing up, the only time he had actually seen scenes of people in the woods was in these, horror flicks where monsters and murderers are behind every tree. And I've actually felt that fear sometimes when I've been in the real wilderness, kind of alone, and nobody around, and I felt moments of fear, but you have to get past them. And if once you do, then going out into the wilderness becomes a joy, and you just have to realize that it's a cultural thing that's been put into us to associate.
See, I'm kind of afraid of the suburbs for the same reason. They weird me out because the suburbs is always where, like in the disaster movies or the horror movies, like they're sort of like the normal everyday life where everything is fine, and then the aliens land, the slasher comes, somebody gets the suburbs to me are like where weird stuff happens, because I've never actually lived in a suburb, always small towns or cities.
Yes. Well, they can be scary. I've lived in suburbs.
But so far, no aliens or slashers or any other thing.
Yeah, the times I've had house-sitting gigs in suburbs, that has not happened so far, so fingers crossed.
Right. It's all a matter of desensitization and getting used to it and getting your attitude right.
So, apparently, if you leave treats out for crows, they will bring you shiny things as payment.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of people having intimate relationships with crows in their neighborhoods. I remember once upon a time I had a show like this one called Green Radio out of Buffalo, and I had asked people to call in with their stories of interaction with wild animals, and this fella called in and he had established a friendship with a crow who lived in the neighborhood. And the crow actually just started hanging out with him. He'd be sitting on his front porch. The crow would come by. They'd go for walks together in the neighborhood. The crow would steal things and bring them to him. And he had this 10-year-long relationship. So I'm not ready to go that deep into interacting with nature. But people do, and sometimes it's really cool.
Well, they like to stay even on the favors owed scale. Apparently, they don't. They want to. They don't want to be beholden. I see. They bring you the shiny stuff. So that keeps the trading relationship good.
So they keep themselves on an equal footing with you, huh? That's nice.
That's nice. As opposed to be recipients of charity.
Well, they're social critters like us, and so they must have some idea of fairness and hierarchy. And I do know that there are many studies that show that crows know the people of their neighborhood by sight.
In other words, the crows who live around you literally know you, and they can even by name, or they could sometimes they even name the people around them, and that they'll make the same sound if somebody's walking by that they see fairly regularly, and so it's don't get on the bad side of the crows. Don't just be nice to them, be respectful, and they'll be, as Rebecca says, they'll be nice and respectful for you. Okay, well, I think it's come time to have our call with Gustavo. I recorded this earlier in the week, and we're going to be talking about the $1 billion that are in the infrastructure bill that already passed in order to clean up some of these toxic Superfund sites around the country. And it was a pretty good interview, pretty deep dive. And I just wanted to mention that $1 billion sounds like a lot, but remember the infrastructure bill was something like 1.4 trillion. So we're talking, less than 1% of the money, but still it's something. And so it's worth noting and worth looking at. And so, Josh, I think we're ready. Let's hear that interview with Gustavo Andrate. Well, Gustavo, welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please tell us your name and title?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Gustavo Andrate, and I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice.
Okay. And congratulations on being Executive Director. I understand you just started, and you got some big...
Thank you.
Yeah, you got some big shoes to fill there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I'm really appreciative of Lois Gibbs having selected me to succeed her, and I'm also really honored to be continuing on this work and continuing to build the center. I know it's a fantastic organization, tons and tons of victories and successful campaigns, and I'm really just happy and honored to be here.
Well, then let's dive right into what's going on here. Well, Gustavo, the reason I'm contacting Center for Health and Environmental Justice is this provision in the infrastructure bill, which is supposedly putting $1 billion into Superfund cleanup. And you folks, of course, are one of the organizations that sort of formed around the whole toxic waste and toxic dump issue. And so I wanted to get your take on this $1 billion. It sounds pretty good. What's the situation?
So first, I want to warn all of the listeners to have some cautious optimism here, because the real question to us is, how is any money for toxic Superfund site cleanups, how is it appropriated? In other words, it's either going to come from your pocket, my pocket, and taxpayers' pockets, and our children's pockets and their children's pockets, or it's going to come from the pockets of those companies that are responsible for the mess to begin with. And by the way, these are some of the biggest companies in the history of the world, and they could certainly afford to pay for their own behavior, for their own irresponsibility, and for their own messes that they have profited from. So what I mean by that is, we can appropriate money from the general tax pool and put that towards Superfund cleanups. That's what's been happening essentially since 1995, because Superfund, when it was created, stipulated that there should be a tax on companies to be able to, certainly to make it super. That's what the super and Superfund comes from, right? It's fueled by tax dollars on polluting companies. Now,
yeah, I remember, way back when it was first set up, and the phrase then was polluter pays. That was the idea.
That's right, and we need to make them pay. And the issue is, in 1995, that tax was allowed to expire by the Newt Gingrich led Congress, and really since then the fund has gone broke. There have been major delays, right? There are some sites on the list that have been waiting for decades for any type of cleanup action from the government. And frankly, there are a lot of other sites that haven't been officially declared Superfund sites that need cleanup, that need attention. And because polluters haven't paid anything in tax since 1995, that essentially any progress is slow to a crawl, because it takes money to clean these places up, right? It takes staffing, it takes training, it takes equipment. Unfortunately, we haven't had any of that. So to make a long story short, any money that comes from general tax appropriation, generally, look, it's welcome. And you quote the $1 billion number. I don't have that number, and especially since the bill hasn't passed yet. But really, what we need, I believe, and most people that we work with on the ground believe, is that we need to make polluters pay for that, and that includes the inclusion of a tax. in Build Back Better, and we don't have that. That is something that even if we won this thing tomorrow, we still wouldn't have it, which is something that I want to make very clear here for everybody.
Right. Yeah. The infrastructure bill, which did pass, $1 billion from that is going to go to 49 existing Superfund sites. And most of them are sites that already have had some remediation done, but they've decided to do more. But there's some new sites on there. But as you say, this is from, this is not the polluters paying for it. This is you and me paying for it. And I wanted to ask you, so they've picked these 49 sites to distribute this $1 billion towards. How much of a dent does cleaning up 49 sites put into our toxic waste dump problem? I mean, how does 49 compare to the total?
Sure. So the number here as of today is 1,322 sites on the national priorities list. And I want to say that if it ends up being that people around those 49 sites do get some relief, I think to them and from their perspective, of course, it means the world, right? That is a life or death situation that is potentially made better. Now, I will tell you this, that looking at the problem overall in the United States that we have of toxic pollution, be it in the air, in the water, or, just in the food that we eat, that is not going to make a huge difference nationally. And especially, I'm thinking about all of the people who have been waiting for cleanup who are not included on that list. So the real, what we're calling for is a reinstatement of the corporate tax. I think that it's more than fair, and it's a very small number when it comes to what these companies have profited from, and it's about time they take some responsibility and stop blocking efforts to reinstate the tax.
Right. And so the tax was originally on like petroleum products, is that right?
So, right. So I think it's, and I know that it's a little bit unclear and can be a little unclear even if you've been doing this for a long time. But the 1980 Superfund bill, the original law that Lois inspired and, through her work at Love Canal and then subsequently with other campaigns, like that called for, there are a few different parts to the Superfund law. And one of those parts is a tax on on corporations of 0.12%. And that is, in 1980 was on income above $3 million. And that is what really created an influx of money into Superfund to pay for the cleanup of all of these communities and all of these neighborhoods. So that is the money that was used to hire crews. That was the money used to rent equipment and pay for training and pay for personal protective equipment for those workers. That is really the heart of Superfund. And that heart hasn't been beating since 1995 because that tax was really only in effect from 1980 to 1995. So there are other parts of Superfund. In other words, there's something that we like to call the toxic menu. So that is the list of chemicals and, like you mentioned, petroleum products that carry with them a certain fee. And what that does mostly is discourage companies from using those products where there are alternatives that are safer for the environment and safer for the communities and safer for wildlife and so forth. But that is really not the heart of Superfund. So that exists, that is part of it. And then on top of those two things, there is a lot of language in Superfund that is incredibly helpful in order to protect our communities and hold polluters accountable. Unfortunately, the EPA has chosen not to use a lot of the tools that are at their disposal to hold companies accountable. So they, for example, can sue a company for triple damages in cases where the company refuses to do the right thing. And that's something that we would love to see them use more often as well.
Yeah, I think you wouldn't have to use that very often to cause big changes in corporate behavior.
Oh God, I agree with you. Imagine if they did it once.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, imagine if they did it once, and, you know, that would certainly put certain people on notice that the government is actually going to act on people's behalf. And it would serve as a huge deterrent, I think, to lots of other companies, and have them think twice, A, before, you know, they dump their garbage into our rivers and into our neighborhoods, but B, you know, they have to run a calculation before they try to skirt the rules. Right now, there's literally nothing preventing them from doing the thing that from their perspective is just it's cheaper, it's easier, and I think that's a shame.
I didn't realize that Superfund actually had sort of prevention built into it as well as cleanup. That's a pretty cool law then.
Yeah, I mean that list of chemicals is I mean, it's public information. Anybody can look it up. It has been amended from time to time, and so what it essentially does, take chemical X, and it stipulates a tax per ton of that chemical. And if a company right now is using that, they have to pay that tax. Now they can choose to use something else instead and save money. So the idea is that there are certain taxes that are in place. I mean, yes, they do function as taxes, but they also function as a deterrent for companies to look elsewhere and find other means to produce their goods.
Let's step back from the Superfund for just a minute and
Sure.
talk a little bit about CHEJ there. Could you share with us a story of some local organization that you folks have helped? Because I know you've been at it for 40 years and you've helped a lot of groups, but I think a lot of people might not be familiar with CHEJ. So just sort of give us an example of the sort of thing your organization does.
Oh, sure. So we provide help in both community organizing, which in my experience is the most useful and resourceful tool to just win justice for our communities and our neighborhoods, and B, also provide scientific background and training, because as you know, like as soon as you get into this type of work, the words start getting longer, and there are chemicals whose names are half a page long that people need to understand. And so we help people figure out like what is behind all of those government reports and those company statements, and try to bring justice to people, because a lot of times I'll tell you, like, they will hide behind a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of paperwork and a lot of testing that's conducted in, let's say like the not most scrupulous ways, because they have things to hide. So CHEJ is here to be on the side of the residents when it comes to any kind of toxic pollution. Now, in organizing, I can give you like a million stories, right, of groups who call us for a whole bunch of different reasons. But one of the very common calls that we get are people saying, okay, like we have this landfill down the street. There's a proposal to expand the landfill. This thing smells bad. I know that my pets have been getting sick from it. I have been getting sick from it. And mostly, like, I'm just sick of the situation because the house that I spent, you know, so many years building and saving up for and paying for isn't worth, you know, half of what I put into it, because all of a sudden, because of this thing's expanding, like my property values have dropped dramatically. I'm sick. I'm having to, you know, care for a lot of other folks. And so right now there's a group in Bristol, Virginia, who is dealing with that very situation. And we're offering help to them when it comes to strategy and community organizing trainings. Like, how do you raise hell, right? And how do you say, like, hey, this is unacceptable to us and it's got to stop? And how do you put pressure on both the companies that are doing the polluting and pressure on the government bodies whose jobs it is to hold them accountable? People can find us, if you're listening to us, chej.org, and that stands for the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice.
Well, thank you so much, Gustavo. And that was our interview. What did you think? Give us a call at 877-909-1007 or text 419-973-5841. And, you know, we always like to hear from CHEJ. And one of my favorite shows was when I interviewed Lois Gibbs, who was, of course, the person who famously pushed forward the Love Canal situation way back during the Carter years. So some interesting information about what's going on with Superfund. And now some interesting information from our advertisers and patrons. Yay! For Green Future is brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy, from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every single day of the year. And there's several ways you can get in touch to find out what they're doing. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. That's 419-353-1897. You can also go to their website, wcparks.org, and they have a nifty app available from any app store. Just search for WC Parks. And, of course, you can also find them on all the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful to have them as a sponsor. And I just want to say that, you know, we need more sponsors. And so if you have a business that has any sort of environmental or green component to it, consider giving us a call, or, you know, contact us by email at joe@joedemar4agreenfuture.org, and we will happily include you in our family of For a Green Future supporters. And of course, part of that family are our patrons, and patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon, and they looked at our page there, scrolled through to pick the level of monthly membership that matches their budget, so that they don't have to suffer any privations for helping us. I always assert, you know, I always repeat, the green future is a comfortable future. You'll have more money, and you'll have, you know, more leisure time, and it'll be better. And the people who are patrons understand this, and so they're willing to make that little bit of a sacrifice to help make that green future a reality, and we're very grateful to them. We're also grateful every week Rebecca finds something interesting about the planet to talk about. So, Rebecca, are you ready to go?
I am ready. Right. Well, this past Thursday was my friend Tim's birthday, and he's from Dallas. So I thought I'd do something about a Dallas landmark. Apparently, there's some nice hills up around Dallas too. But the big thing I found was the Trinity River. The Trinity River was named by Alonso de Leon in 1690 after the Holy Trinity, because Spanish explorers like to do that. A couple years before that, Rob de La Salle in 1687 named it the River of Canoes. Apparently it's in the normal course of things, small, shallow. I don't know. I'm guessing that he saw a lot of canoes on it, so it might have been part of an important trading route or something. So that would be cool. I don't know. Maybe he just thought the only thing you could get down it is the canoe, which just turned out to be just about right. Trinity River is 710 miles long. It's the longest river with a watershed entirely within the state of Texas. So starts in Texas, ends in Texas, drains Texas. The source is in the far north of Texas, a few miles south of the Red River. It's separated from the Red River by a high bluff, apparently. That area is a lot of hills up there, and it's called the North Texas Hill Country, as opposed to the other Texas Hill Country, just the Texas Hill Country. So I didn't know that. Sounds kind of cool. The mouth, it comes out into the Gulf Coast at Trinity Bay, which is sort of an inlet of the Galveston Bay complex. So yeah, the two major cities, or two of them that it goes by, are Dallas and Fort Worth in that area. It has forks. It has a lot of forks. It has the West Fork, the Clear Fork, the Elm Fork, and the East Fork. I finally looked up and found what a fork is. A fork can either be a tributary or a distributary of a river. I think it has to be kind of smaller than the main river when all of the forks come together. All of the forks of the Trinity River appear to be tributaries, no distributaries as far as I can tell.
So forks can point both ways then.
Yeah, I think it might be sort of a slippery form, but traditionally it's big, but it's not as big as the main river, and the west, the Clear, the Elm, and the East are all kind of fairly similarly sized, I guess. Anyway, they all get united by Dallas, and then from there, Dallas Fort Worth goes right through downtown Dallas, and I think also Fort Worth flows, and then it goes on to flow through the lowland pine forests, and comes out in the Gulf near the city of Anahuac. So, okay. Yeah, pretty long. There were apparently plans at one point to canal it in the 1830s, but they decided there would have been too much dredging because it's really not a very deep river. So they built 7 out of the 36 planned locks and dams downstream of Dallas, and then they stopped because of World War I. What happened, and they've just been sitting there ever since. I don't think they ever got used for shipping. I don't know what happens to a lock and a dam when you just sort of leave it set for over 100 years. I don't know. It sounds a little worrisome because of me, but what do I know?
Well, you just need to take a walk down the canal trail down there on Maumee, and you can see 100-year-old locks, and they don't look too good.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, they're not really functioning as locks, But, currently the Corps, I just had it referred to as the Corps. I'm assuming they're referring to the Army Corps of Engineers, is working on something called the Dallas Floodway Extension Program, which is supposed to reduce flood risk and restore the ecosystem. Couldn't really get any details on how they're going to do that. There's also the Trinity River Corridor Project, which is raising the levees and also making downtown Dallas flood zone into a park. So they're basically just not going to build anything there because they've realized it's a bad idea. Dallas is apparently exceptionally prone to floods, hail, drought, tornadoes, and hurricanes. Although they don't have very many earthquakes, so that's nice for them, and not apparently a huge fire risk. They've been called, by some people anyway, the U.S.'s most high-risk city for natural disasters in general. So apparently the University of Texas has a big center for flash flood warning technology where they work on that kind of thing, mostly because of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And although there's been flooding in other parts of Texas too, hasn't there? But yeah, apparently I read in a paper that was online, but their technology relies on information from past flooding. Now, being that flooding is getting much more severe as time passes here in recent decades, that seems like a problem. They're basing their information on past flooding.
Okay.
The hailstorm in 2012, apparently, there was a hailstorm that cost $90 million. They're in Tornado Alley. And then, of course, there was a thing where Winter Storm Uri froze the power grid, and apparently, despite what state of Texas will try to tell you, solar and wind failed half as often as the other petroleum-based technologies and whatnot.
So wind and sun are twice as reliable.
Basically,
So wind and solar power are cool.
there's something a little odd that goes on with, there's been more recent flooding in I think in 2021, fairly recently. When I looked this up, I saw sort of like passing references to it with very little information. If you go on YouTube, there's a crap ton of really dramatic videos of Dallas flash flooding in 2021. This like terrifying tiny little streams turned into terrifying raging flood rivers. It looks like, frankly, these people do not have much sense of self-preservation. If I were him, I would have gotten in my car and driven the heck away from that place in case it suddenly got bigger, which it looked like it might. There's one guy who was filming cars trying to go through a flooded road, and at one point this one car starts spinning around and then somehow gets its footing again and drives out of that. And he's looking at it like, oh my God, that's so cool. Look at that. Apparently not really dwelling on the fact that someone is about to die, very possibly. But then when you look for official statistics, it's very hard to find any kind of statistics on deaths or property damage from that flood. And the official Dallas sites, it's all dominated when you look up, costs of flooding for 2021 Dallas floods. It's all official Dallas sites about how well managed the floodplains are and how it's enhancing life in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It could be that was not that big a deal and there wasn't that much damage from the flood, but it looked pretty damaging from the pictures. So you got to wonder if the stories are being scrubbed.
Yes, well, we will keep wondering, and we will keep looking.
We will.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca.
All right, and now we go on to our ecological news segment, and I have to apologize to everyone. I've gone off the live feed from the program that we recorded on Sunday because that echo that you heard in parts of the program was really bad while I was recording this first story. We know what the problem was. It won't happen again, but unfortunately it was almost unlistenable. So my apologies to the people who are listening live and trying to get this story. There is a superload, a tank on a truck, which is over 200 feet long, over 294 tons, and it's traveling from New York to Pennsylvania, and it turns out it was the outer shell of a nuclear reactor. It was a training reactor that was used by the Navy for their training their officers who were going to be running nuclear power plants on things like subs and aircraft carriers. And one thing that I couldn't find in this story, this kind of supports Rebecca's idea that we're not getting a lot of information, is what kind of radiation this huge radioactive tank is going to be giving off.
Which seems like an important thing to cover if you are the news.
Yes, because the kind of radiation makes a huge difference on the effect it's going to have on the people around it. Because, alpha radiation, which is basically like a nucleus, is like a proton, that does not react very much with your body because it's got so much energy and so much of a charge that it can't penetrate your layer of dead skin cells. So unless you've got like an open sore, or if you take it internally, if you get an alpha radiation internally, it does even more damage. But if it's alpha, it's probably not going to damage you too much. If it's beta, you might catch some radiation. And if it's gamma, and like I say, if it was, in fact, the tank surrounding a nuclear core, it could well be giving off gamma, and you get stuck behind this thing trundling along at 30 miles an hour. And that's what all the focus of the coverage was about how this is going to delay traffic. If you get stuck behind something giving off gamma rays for a couple hours, you are going to get seriously irradiated. It could be a real threat to your health. But couldn't find that information. Like I say, and it was just in passing that one of them mentioned it was radioactive, and a different article mentioned what it was for. So be careful if you're driving on 81 heading south anytime this week. Watch out for the giant radioactive truck that's going to be passing through.
Okay, now next story, ecological news. The Environmental Protection Agency has created something called the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, and that is to spend the money that was already put forward in the infrastructure bill. And unfortunately, it looks like it's pretty much an Office of Dirty Energy Demonstrations, because there's no mention on there of wind or solar. What they talk about is carbon capture, which is a fantasy that the fossil fuel industry loves to talk about, and they've been talking about for 20 years. The theoretical ability to capture carbon from the air or from smokestacks and sequester it so that you don't make global warming worse. Problem is, it hasn't worked, and to scale it up, would actually put more carbon in the air, because you have to have energy to take the carbon out. It's just crazy, but that's one of their focuses. Another is nukes. They want nuclear reactors and lots of them. And so this Office of Dirty Energy Demonstration is up and running now, according to their website. And I just want to mention that Biden over and over again says he wants the economic benefits of all his programs to go into like poorer and minority neighborhoods so they can share in the wealth. But if what you're putting in those neighborhoods are these nuclear reactors, really that's just plain old environmental racism. That's just plain old dump the radiation on the poor people. That's no different from what we've been doing for the past 100 years. But Office of quote unquote clean energy is up and running, and that's the news. Next story, we gotta really rush through here. We're almost out of time. The newly elected Republican governor of Virginia, has decided to put in place his Secretary of Natural Resources, and this kind of tells you what the Republicans are like when it comes to environment. He's trying to put into place Andrew Wheeler, and that name might be familiar because he was Trump's head of the EPA, and before that he was a lobbyist for the coal industry. And what has happened there in Virginia is 158 former EPA officials, and this is both Republicans and Democrats from all across administrations, from the Reagan administration straight through the Trump administration, have sent a letter to the governor-elect there, Greg Youngkin, and they said, essentially, in so many words, they said, don't hire this scumbag. Because it turned out, while he was head of the EPA, he literally just trashed any kind of science that stood in the way of expanding coal or oil or gas. He completely threw out perfectly good, perfectly valid scientific studies. He made rules that had no relationship to reality, and he was just awful. And he actually took it over from a fellow named Pruitt, who had been the EPA head before, and he got kicked out because of massive scandals, because he basically used the Environmental Protection Agency like his personal vacation fund. He was just spending money on himself, and neither of them were doing anything to protect the environment. They were both working hard, Pruitt and Wheeler. In fact, they were working so hard that all these former EPA officials have sent a letter to the governor-elect saying, don't do this. He's horrible. So we'll see what the reaction is. Now, next story. My cell phone just had an upgrade, and it got a new app. Apple has revamped the app for the weather app, and now it includes a global temperature map. And so I was looking on there, and I looked, and Australia and Argentina were like this really dark red. I was like, what is going on there? Did a Google search. Sure enough, they are having an incredible heat wave in the southern hemisphere in both South America and Australia. Record temperatures was 123.3 in Australia this past week, which ties the all-time record ever recorded in the southern hemisphere. Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil are all having incredible heat waves. People are dying. Buenos Aires, it was on track to break their all-time record, but then there was a wildfire, and so the smoke from the wildfire lowered the temperature, so it only got up to 106.7 there, which was the second highest temperature ever recorded in Brazil, but they didn't break the record this time. Better luck next time, Brazil. Yale Climate Change newsletter has a big article on the whole southern hemisphere heat crisis this year. And one of the things they point out in the article on January 14th by Jeff Masters is that these heat waves in the southern hemisphere lead to higher food prices because some of these countries, like Argentina, are some of the biggest producers of wheat in the world. And so people are blaming Biden for inflation, but really part of the problem is climate change means less food being able to be grown, which means higher prices. I had looked earlier in the week to spot Argentina and Australia being super hot, and this morning I looked again. They've cooled down a little bit, a few degrees, but Africa looked even darker red. And so I did the same Google search. I searched, heat wave Africa, and there was nothing except a bunch of articles saying that we're not monitoring Africa. So we don't have the numbers for Africa. So they could be having also a record heat wave, but we just don't know it because they're not on the map. Okay, big news out of Germany. I really wanted to get this one in. This is some good news, so we may end on this good news here. The German Minister of the Environment on the 11th of January has announced that the whole country is going to go 100% renewable energy by 2035. And by renewables, they mean no nukes, no coal, no natural gas. It's all going to be wind, solar, conservation, geothermal heating, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to revamp the entire economy. Now, he's gotten some criticism from environmentalists saying it's not fast enough, but that's still one of the best in the country, with the largest economy in Europe, saying we're going to go 100% green by 2035. And again, Germany leading the world on that. And they're also committing to having 2% of their country available for renewable infrastructure like solar panels. And all new houses have to have solar panels on them. It's now the law in Germany. So they're doing great. We need to do as well. Thanks for listening. This is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
I don't want them nukes run